I remembered everything the moment I opened my eyes. Not the slow, foggy way memories usually return, not the gradual reassembly of yesterday or last week or last year. Everything came back at once, like a door blown open by wind. Every betrayal. Every lie. Every moment of the life I had already lived, crashing into me like a wave while I lay in a bed that smelled of antiseptic and unfamiliar linen. I was 17 again. And I knew exactly what was coming. In my first life, I had been naive. That is the only word for it. Naive in the specific, catastrophic way of someone who wants so badly to belong somewhere that they refuse to see the evidence that they don't. My name is Lily. Lily Chen, or so I had been told for 17 years. The Chen family had taken me in as an infant. They had raised me in their large house in the city, alongside their biological daughter, May, who was 6 months younger than me and who had, for as long as I could remember, treated me with the particular cruelty of someone who understands that they hold the permanent advantage. The Chens were wealthy. Not extraordinarily so, comfortable, the kind of family that had a housekeeper and a driver and a dining room that was used for important occasions. Father Chen worked in finance. Mother Chen managed their social calendar with the dedication of a general managing a campaign. They had told me, since I was old enough to understand the concept, that I was lucky to be with them. That they had taken me from nothing and given me everything. That gratitude was the appropriate response to my existence in their house. I had believed them. I had spent 17 years being grateful. Being helpful. Being careful not to take up too much space or ask for too much or remind anyone that the things I had been given could also be taken away. And in my first life, they had been taken away. I need to tell you how my first life ended. Because you need to understand what I knew when I woke up the second time. I was 19 when the Chens told me the truth. Or rather, when they told me a version of the truth calibrated to hurt me as efficiently as possible while serving their purposes. There was a business deal. A merger that Father Chen needed to secure. The other party, a man named Winston Park, head of Park Industries, one of the most significant private conglomerates in the country, had conditions. Not unusual conditions, business conditions. But among them, delicately framed, was a preference for a family connection. A marriage, eventually, between the Park family's eldest son, Daniel, and a suitable young woman. The Chens had a suitable young woman. Except they didn't want to waste May on a merger. May was their real daughter. May had plans. May was already being positioned for a match with an old money family whose name would open certain doors that even money couldn't. They had a spare daughter, though. Me. The conversation happened at the dinner table. Not privately, not with any particular gentleness. Father Chen explained the situation with the efficiency of a man discussing a business arrangement, which, to him, was exactly what it was. I would be introduced to Daniel Park. I would make a good impression. I would, in time, make myself agreeable enough to be chosen. I asked what happened if Daniel didn't choose me. Father Chen looked at me across the dinner table with an expression that I had seen before but had never correctly read. I had always interpreted it as mild disappointment. I understood now that it was something colder. Then you'll have failed at the one useful thing we've asked of you, he said. And we'll need to rethink your arrangement here. Mother Chen said nothing. May, beside her, looked at the table. In my first life, I had tried. I had dressed carefully and attended the Park family events and met Daniel, who was not unkind but who was clearly being managed toward a different match by his own family. I had tried for 6 months to make myself agreeable enough to solve a problem I had not created. Daniel chose someone else. And the Chens, true to Father Chen's word, rethought my arrangement. I was 20 when they told me I had 3 months to find other accommodations. That they would give me a small sum to get started and that they expected me to be grateful for that too. I had nowhere to go. I spent the next 4 years rebuilding from nothing. I worked 2 jobs. I finished a business degree at night school. I built something modest and mine, and I was, by 26, functional enough that the worst was behind me. And then I died. A car accident on a wet road on a Wednesday evening. Quick, I was told, though I was not there to receive the information, obviously. Just, a wet road. A car. The end of one version of everything. And then I opened my eyes in that antiseptic-smelling bed, 17 years old, with every memory of the life I had already lived burning bright and clear in my mind. I lay very still for a long moment. And then I began to plan. The first thing I understood was time. I was 17. The Chin family's dinner table conversation, the one about Daniel Park, the one that had set everything in motion, would not happen for 2 more years. I had 2 years before the Chens moved their pieces into position. 2 years to move first. The second thing I understood was that I needed information I had not had in my first life. Specifically, who was I actually? The Chens had told me I came from nothing. That my birth parents were unknown or unfit or both. I had accepted this because I had no reason not to, and because the story served the Chens' preferred narrative of themselves as benefactors. But in my first life, in those 4 hard years after they'd expelled me, I had encountered something strange. A woman at one of my jobs, a small accounting firm, who had looked at me one afternoon with the startled, searching expression of someone trying to place a face. She had said, after a moment, "You look so much like someone I used to know." She had not told me who. I had not asked. In my second life, I was going to ask. Her name was Mrs. Lin. She worked at the accounting firm on Hanover Street, and she had worked there for 20 years, and in my first life she had seen my face and said something that I had not followed. I found the firm in a directory at the school library. I wrote a letter, careful, formal, using the adult language I had learned in a lifetime I had technically not yet lived, explaining that I was a student interested in accounting as a career and asking if anyone at the firm might be willing to speak with me. Mrs. Lin was the one who responded. We met on a Saturday at a coffee shop near her office. She was a small woman in her 60s with precise handwriting and the particular attentiveness of someone who has spent 40 years paying close attention to numbers. She looked at me across the table. And she went very still. "I'm sorry," she said. Forgive me, this is strange, you look extraordinarily like someone I once knew." "Who?" I said. Directly. With no preamble. Because I had spent a previous lifetime being indirect and it had not served me. She hesitated. "A man named Richard Zhao," she said. "We worked together, a long time ago." Before she stopped. "You can't be related to him. He only has one child, and that child is," she stopped again. "Mrs. Lin," I said. "My name is Lily Chen. I was adopted as an infant. I have no information about my birth family. If there is any chance that you know something about where I came from, I need you to tell me." She looked at me for a very long time. Then she opened her bag and took out her phone. Richard Zhao. In my first life, I had heard that name. Everyone had heard that name. Richard Zhao was the founder of Zhao Holdings, one of the largest private investment conglomerates in the country. He had built it over 30 years from a small trading company into something that touched real estate, technology, manufacturing, and half a dozen other sectors. His net worth, according to the magazine profiles that appeared every few years, was somewhere between $8 and $12 billion. He was also, according to Mrs. Lin, who had known him when they were both young accountants at a small firm 25 years ago, a man who had suffered a personal tragedy that he had never fully recovered from. His daughter had been taken from the hospital. She was 3 days old. Her mother, Richard's wife, a woman named Sue who had died of complications from the birth before she could be told what had happened, had named her before she passed. Lily. I sat in that coffee shop for a long time after Mrs. Lin finished talking. She had called him. Or rather, She had called his office. She had not spoken to Richard Zhao directly in 15 years, but she had a number from an old colleague network, and she made the call while I sat across from her and watched her face do complicated things. She spoke to someone. An assistant, from the sound of it. She said she had information that she believed Mr. Zhao would consider extremely urgent. She left her name and her number. The callback came in 40 minutes. It was not an assistant. I want to describe the phone call carefully because it was the most important conversation of my life. Both of them, actually, both lives. A man's voice. Controlled, precise, the kind of voice that had spent decades being composed in high-stakes rooms. But underneath the control, something was happening that the composure could not fully contain. Mrs. Lin handed me the phone. "Mr. Zhao," I said. "My name is Lily. I'm 17 years old. I was adopted by the Chen family as an infant and I have no documentation of my birth parents." I paused. "I think I might be your daughter." Silence. Not the silence of doubt or dismissal. A different silence. The kind that has a sound to it, the sound of someone who has been waiting for something for 17 years and is trying to determine, in real time, whether this is the moment. "Where are you?" he said. His voice had fractured slightly on the words, just slightly, just enough. I told him. He said, "Don't move. I'm coming." The legal process took 5 months. The Chen family's role in the situation was complex. They had not committed the original act, but they had knowingly maintained a fraudulent guardianship for 17 years. Father Chen's lawyers negotiated. Richard's lawyers did not negotiate as much as Richard's lawyers applied the kind of sustained legal pressure that is only available to people with essentially unlimited resources and a very clear sense of what justice looked like in this particular situation. The outcome was not a prison sentence. The law was complicated and the evidence of what Father Chen had known and when was difficult to establish with criminal certainty. But it was significant. Financial penalties. The dismantling of a business partnership that had depended on certain relationships that now, in the new reality of what the Chen family was and what had been done, were no longer available. Father Chen lost the deal he had been building for 4 years. The irony was not lost on me that this was a different deal from the Park Industries merger, the one he had planned to use me for in my first life. In this life, I had left before that conversation could happen. He had tried to find another angle, another piece, another useful variable. And instead he had lost everything he had been building. May, I heard through the distance of legal proceedings, had moved abroad. I did not know the details. I did not need to. Mother Chen sent a letter through her lawyer. It said she had not known everything. It said she was sorry. It said she hoped I could understand. I read the letter once and put it in a drawer and did not answer it. Some things are not mine to resolve. Richard Zhao was not a perfect man. I want to say that clearly because this story is about truth, and the truth is complicated. He was brilliant and driven and had spent 30 years building something extraordinary by being, in his own words, better at business than at everything else. He had regrets. He carried his grief in the particular contained way of people who have never fully processed it. It lived in the precision of his work, in the controlled efficiency of everything around him, in the silence he kept about his wife. He was not a father the way I had imagined fathers in the childhood I was replaying. He was a man trying to become one. And I was a 17-year-old with a full lifetime of experience that I could not explain to him, trying to let him. We were awkward with each other for months. There were dinners that ran out of conversation. There were questions he asked that I answered too precisely for my age, and I could see him registering the strangeness of it and not knowing what to do with the observation. There were moments of real warmth that neither of us quite knew how to hold. And then, gradually, the way these things happen when people are genuinely trying, it got easier. He taught me about the business. Not because I needed him to, I had spent years in my first life learning finance out of necessity. But because he wanted to, and I understood that teaching was his way of being with someone, and so I let him teach me and I asked questions I already knew the answers to and watched his face do something that I came to understand was happiness. I enrolled in school. Not the Chen's school, a different one, better, in a neighborhood that made the Chen's comfortable house look modest. I made friends with the careful selectivity of someone who understood, from hard experience, what friendship actually required. I built a life. A real one. The first real one. In the spring of my 19th year, the age I had been in my first life when the Chens had delivered their dinner table verdict, Richard took me to see the building where Zhao Holdings had begun. A small office in a district that had since been renovated into something unrecognizable. The building was still there, though. A narrow 4-story block with a coffee shop on the ground floor and an accounting firm above it that had not moved in 30 years. He stood on the pavement outside it and looked up. I brought almost nothing to this building when I started, he said. I had a business plan and a loan and the absolute certainty that I was going to make it work. He paused. I don't know where that certainty came from. I had no right to it. I stood beside him. You had already decided who you were, I said. That's where it comes from. You decided and nothing was going to talk you out of it. He looked at me. That particular look he had developed over 2 years, the one that was still slightly astonished that I existed, that I was his, that the thing that had been lost had been found. You sound like her sometimes, he said. Your mother. Tell me about her, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he began. We stood on that pavement for an hour. He talked about Sue. About the way she laughed. About her stubbornness and her warmth and the way she had been certain, absolutely certain, that their daughter was going to change something in the world. I listened to my father tell me about my mother and I felt the shape of myself settle into something I had never found in 17 years in the Chen house. I felt like I had come from somewhere. Like I belonged to something. Like I was, finally and completely, home. There is something I want to say before I finish. In my first life, I spent years trying to earn a place in a family that had already decided I was a resource rather than a person. I made myself small and grateful and useful and it was never enough because enough was never the point. In my second life, I left before they could use me. I asked the question I had been too afraid to ask before. I found the door I had walked past without opening. I do not know if you believe in second chances the way this story requires you to believe in them. Perhaps you don't. Perhaps the idea of a second life is just a story, a way of imagining what it would feel like to know what you know now when you were still young enough to change the outcome. But here is what I believe is true, regardless of the form the story takes. You always know more than you think you know. The feeling of not belonging in a room that is supposed to be yours, that feeling is information. The specific loneliness of being useful to people rather than loved by them, that is information. The question you have not asked because you are afraid of the answer, that question deserves an answer. Ask it now. Not in a second life. In this one. Because the door does not disappear. The father at the end of the phone call does not stop existing because you have not yet made the call. The life that is actually yours does not stop being yours because someone else has been occupying it. Go find it. You have always had the right to look.